Okay, so today we're going to be talking about materialism or materialistic thinking and basically why this is like a hidden disease that is killing your chess. It's going to be slightly more advanced videos, so buckle up, it's going to be a good one. So first of all, before we even get into going anything within the Google Slides, of course, have a bit of a think, look at this position, and I don't want you to overthink this, just spend 15 to 30 seconds max, and just give like what is the move that you would instinctively play in this position if it was a blitz game. But anyways, hopefully you've had a think. We're gonna again come back to this later. To really set the stage for this video though, I want to talk about what is value in chess. And this is important to discuss because it really, like when you understand this, it changes your entire worldview of the game. And for most people, their worldview of chess and how they view like what is valuable on the chessboard is material. And okay, they might understand there's some other things, but usually like whether they realize it or not, material is the number one, and for some people maybe the only form of value that they really kind of fully understand. And of course there are other forms of value. There's time, space, pawn structure, weak squares, weak color complexes, and material is really just one form of, I like to see it, currency that you can exchange for these other forms of value. And this might kind of sound obvious with me saying it and just like on a pair of Google Slides, but again, we're going to go over some real examples throughout this video to really reinforce this idea. Before doing that though, I just want to actually bring up this book. This is a really good book, one of the best chess books I have ever read, Beyond Material by Grandmaster Dvoran Kolyasevich. And basically, he talks about this idea in the book that really stuck with me, and it's the idea of a conditioned reflex. And if you think about it like a reflex, right? Like if you're kicking a soccer ball or hitting like a tennis ball with like a racket, whatever, like those are all reflexes, right? That you've trained up over time and become proficient at. And in chess, we also have reflexes, right? Like for example, someone will attack a pawn, you will defend the pawn, or you will move it, or something like that, right? Or like they will attack your king, you get out of check, right? Like these sort of things are reflexes that we build up over time. However, there are often reflexes that we build up as chess players that are to our detriment. And one of these conditioned reflexes are often to do with material because, as beginner players, the problem you often have is you have material that is attacked and you don't defend it, and then you just like hang a queen or something, right? Or you move a piece to a square where it's unsafe, and then you lose it. And so over time we actually develop reflexes that kind of make it us blind to ideas that involve losing material. And this can actually hold back a lot of players from reaching like the next level that they need to. So yeah, again, we're going to be getting in some real examples, kind of show what I'm talking about. But quick ad before we do that. If you so far have found anything at all remotely interesting, you're probably also going to like my newsletter, so there's a link down in the description below for that. But anyways, getting right back onto topic. Alright, so this is the first position that I wanted to bring up for today, taken from one of my old students' games from about 2 years or so ago, and since I've shown it to at least 15 or 20 different people, so I have a fairly decent idea of probably the different things you could be thinking of in this position. But anyways, have a bit of a pause here, think about what you would actually do, and yeah, anyways, after you do that, we'll come back and discuss. So probably the default thing that you want to do in this position, and unfortunately my old student did, is you probably want to take the pawn. I mean, like the free pawn, so you would think, right? However, if we look deeper, so rook takes f6, let's try and visualize this. So probably they're going to take, I imagine. I mean, anything else is not too critical. And the idea that hopefully we're considering after this is that our opponent can play rook a d8. And from there, they not only occupy the open d file and control that, which is not so easy for us to control. I mean, if we could just play like 2 moves in a row, rook like f1 and then like another rook d1, maybe it's not so bad. But obviously they have a whole tempo to infiltrate either d2 or d4 and hit these pawns. And this is the other thing in the position, not only do they get the open file, but also we get our structure kind of a little bit crippled, which also kind of basically means that in this position, after rook takes f6, takes rook a d8, white essentially has full compensation for the pawn. To give one example line to show how things could maybe play out, let's say white plays rook af1, and then actually let's say c3, rook d2, rook f2, or let's say black plays rook fd8, and rook c3, by the way, this is just to stop rook d4. So anyways, let's say this happens, rook fd8, and now rook af1, making it so now after takes, you are sort of stopping the infiltration, but after rook d1 check, rook f1, we're still attacking the pawn, and a very logical way to round out the game could be just to repeat the moves and draw. Or you could try play rook b1, but now you have this issue of your rook is very passive, and black can even play rook e2 and round up the pawn, or even just sit on king g7 and just say like, well, what are you going to do? Because if you try to play king f1, king e1 to kick the rook out, then this pawn hangs, and if you just sit as white, I mean like, well, it's not even that easy to do that. So basically black is completely fine in this position, and therefore actually rook takes f6, despite looking like a free pawn at first, probably shouldn't be too great. After that though, some of you might have then looked at bishop takes e6, but hopefully didn't look at that too much longer, because after takes, I mean, yeah, you stop them from taking on c4 and crippling the structure that way, but you also get rid of the doubled f-pawn weaknesses. Maybe you could say these pawns are doubled, but they're not really as weak because they're not on an open file. We could attack like these f-pawns, so also not really too promising. I mean, white can double up on the f-file now, but black can pretty easily defend the attack. So pretty much what that leaves us is not that many moves. The one that I like the most is b3, but there are also two other moves that could be decent, which are bishop b3 and bishop d5. They're not quite as accurate, but it's more important for me in this position that you get the general gist of why rook takes f6 is wrong and what you should be going for instead, which is just keeping the tension and aiming for a structure like, let's say you went bishop b3, for example. Now the idea is if they take, our pawn structure is still like kind of one solid pawn chain or pawn island, and you keep the f-pawn as the doubled f-pawns as weaknesses you can attack in the long term by just doubling up the rooks. It's important to note these pawns are not running anywhere, they are long-term stable weaknesses that we can attack. Bishop d5 is also interesting with the idea that if they take us, then, you know, we have the potential to get protected past d-pawn. Probably they should keep the tension. Or the move I like the most is b3, with the idea that if they take, and yeah, we still... Technically this is two pawn islands now, but this pawn is not that weak, and yeah, this is pretty decent. There are some drawbacks with bishop d5 and bishop to b3, but we're not going to get into that right now too much. It's getting a bit too nitty-gritty at that point. The most important thing I want you guys to notice though is rook takes f6, and how, although it looks like a free pawn, we are giving black too much counterplay in the arising position. Okay, so for this next position, this is another tricky one. Have a bit of a think, see what you would play in this position as black. So hopefully you've had a think, and also, I mean, of course, given the theme of the video, you're probably a little bit skeptical of like, what if I take on e4? And right off the bat, you've probably noticed something like this, where white gets a queen on to f6, and already, to be honest, like, this should be like feeling kind of unpleasant that white's just able to stick their queen there, and after a move like king h7, that, you know, you can't really move this rook on h6, you can't really move this rook on f8 either, because then you would hang this. Like, this alone should already be kind of showing red flags, but I'll go even a little bit deeper to show how, this is how the game actually continued, what kind of happened. So white played rook bd1, getting their rook out of the attack. Black grabbed another pawn. At this point, they should have just cut their losses, just played g5, tried to give a pawn back, so at least this way the rook has some freedom. Also, rook takes d6 isn't going to be possible, as we soon saw in the game, so queen takes e3. They're attacking this, and they're also threatening queen takes h3 and this, so certainly no time for any of this monkey business. But yeah, bishop f3, take, queen moves, rook takes d6, and again, now we see a really just even worse version of what we were talking about before, where we talked about how these rooks couldn't move. Now it's even more clear that they can't, right? And given we've simplified the material a bit, we trade off a pair of bishops, the only piece of blacks that can actually move right now is this queen on e2. And like, I mean, the queen alone, as brave as she is probably not going to be able to do a whole lot. So yeah, went downhill pretty quickly from this position. Black tried to play king g8 and maybe regroup the rook somehow. And maybe so like at least for rooks on g7, you can somehow use this rook to do something else. But white played queen e7, and if you want to pause to see what the idea is after rook h7, I'd encourage you to do so. But yeah, now for rook h7, which I'm not even sure really was black's idea, but they need to do something right. This is rook takes g6, and then mate. So that doesn't even work anymore. They tried to do some stuff with the queen, but yeah, now the idea is, okay, that the queen's protected, so there's no rook takes g6 discovery, and you're pinning the rook, I guess. But there was a nice move white played, a3. So now if the queen takes here, it's unprotected, and you can take. And if they get queen e1, then there's rook d8, and you're threatening this. If they take, which they did in the game, then it's just pretty much forced mate in X moves, because the king's gonna move somewhere, you're gonna take, and you can see how this is gonna go. So long story short, knight takes e4, way too greedy. We have to be able to see in this position that after queen f6, it's going to be very unpleasant and difficult for us to really get these rooks out, and we're going to be very tied down. And so again, instead of doing all of this stuff, it would just be much simpler to play g5. And similar to the last position where we remember black had these doubled f-pawns, right, where we could just leave them and there would be long-term weaknesses, these e-pawns are kind of similar, right? There's no rush to take them immediately. They're not going anywhere. And we can now protect against this. Now if we take on the next move, there's not going to be queen f6, of course, unless they really want to sacrifice their queen. Would be fitting for the video, wouldn't it? But yeah, g5 would be a good idea. Bishop d3 maybe they should play, but it's very passive. I mean, the bishop is practically the tall pawn at this point, blending in with the pawn chain, so wouldn't really be a very pleasant position to play. This is what black should have done. Alright, and so this is a position you might remember that I pulled up at the start of the video, and as you can see now, it's a game of Anatoly Karpov's from the black side, and Karpov, he just made a very profound impact on me as a player growing up. One of my really top, probably just my favorite player of all time to actually study. There's a certain feeling to his games I just didn't get studying anyone else, but anyways, enough yapping. So bishop h6 was played, and you probably decided on something. And the two most common moves that people would say, like rook e8, and then maybe knight g7. But Karpov played something really amazing in this position that I'll basically never forget, bishop g5. Sacrificing the rook on f8, but again, like, it's not even really like a sacrifice in some sense. I mean, it kind of is. But again, it's, if you view it through the lens of being an exchange, he gave up the rook, which in some sense actually is important to understand. Like, rooks are always more valuable when the position is more open. But if you look at the position, that's relatively closed right now. So in some sense, like, the rooks are going to be slightly less valuable because of that aspect. But moreover, the important thing to grasp was just how weak white's dark square complex became after we made this exchange of their bishop for our rook. And not just like one weak square, but like the whole complex of dark squares, in particular on the king side. If you look at this kind of like constellation of dark squares, like we're going to play bishop f4, we're going to pick up this diagonal is going to be weak afterwards, we can put a knight on f4, and it's really just going to give a lot of compensation, even more. I mean, black actually, if you put this into a computer, is close to winning, so pretty much that's the picture. But also I think it's just helpful to understand as well why it is. Like, imagine actually if you took away these double pawns and you put like this pawn on g3. Then like that would actually mean white would be probably just better in this position, because the dark square complex wouldn't be weak. It's the fact these double isolated pawns exist, well, not isolated but double backward, I guess, given the pawn there exist. It makes it very difficult for white to properly defend it, in addition to the fact that they lack a dark squared bishop. If this bishop could transport to like g3 somehow, and it would be on a dark square instead of on light square, that again would be another feature of the position that would probably reduce the amount of compensation that black has after this exchange sacrifice. So let's actually see though how the game played out. So rook g1, bishop f4, takes, and again, you do not want to take, because then after takes, black would, again, or white rather, would get more control over the dark square complex. But after knight f4, we keep that control. queen d2, bishop c7, and we just continue to dominate the position, not even allowing b4. They try to play a3, but they never actually were going to go b4. I mean, we control the square pretty well. Even c5 opens up for the knight then, and yeah, h4, kicking knight back, queen e7, and this is just the icing on the cake at this point, threatening to come into g2. So white gets so desperate, they're like, okay, buddy, if you take the knight, like, I'll take it. Karpov didn't even take it, he just left it there, and now took it, actually, seeing that after rook d8 tempo move, that he could get the knight into d3, given the bishop was no longer protecting that square. And the rest of the game was just history. We're not going to go over this too much. But again, the key lesson of this game was that, you know, we saw this position after bishop h6. Your automatic reflex was probably move the rook, get out of the attack, don't think about anything. But because of the circumstances of this position, Karpov was able to recognize that the dark squares as a whole actually mattered a lot more than this rook. And not to compare myself too much to a world champion, but earlier this year when I was playing a classical game out in Slovenia, actually in Europe, I had this position where my opponent had just, after me playing knight h5, decided to play bishop h6, attacking my rook on f8. And you might want to take a think, in this position, what would you play as black? And I was kind of salivating here after my opponent played this move, as I was like, okay, I mean, I could play rook e8, I could defend the rook, and like, I would probably still have a good position, but I was like, I think I have something stronger. And I detected that I had the possibility to play this move knight takes g3, and after they take the bishop, after we take back, that because all their pawns are kind of on light squares, they just gave their dark squared bishop up. Their dark squares would be incredibly weak after they go for this. They played rook f2, bishop h6, and again, we're basically seeing that the dark squares are really coming under attack if they just play like knight d2. I thought they might go for something like this in the game, but it's just a very difficult position. The king's not only, I mean, weak in addition to the dark squares, but yeah, just their position's very passive. In general, it's not easy to defend the position. Maybe takes, and bishop takes h3 could also be coming as well. Very, very pleasant. And I mean, the reason as well that they're even going for knight f1 in the first place is because bishop e3 is a threat. Or at least I thought that would be a logical thing to do in the game. Instead, what actually happened, we breached this position. My opponent played f takes e5, but then that just allows bishop e3, winning back the exchange. And the game actually ended pretty quickly. I was going to win back the pawn. If they go, let's say, knight d2, we would take. Maybe they go queen e2, but queen h4, you could imagine something like this. And I mean, just look at all the threats, right? I mean, even knight f4 actually would be good. Attacking the queen, and then like you take that. It's just getting like too difficult to watch at this point. So my opponent actually tried e6, but queen f6, hitting the rook. They tried to take, queen takes, and at this point they just resigned because they realized if they go back, rook f8, and that is all going to come crumbling down very quickly. So again, we went over that pretty quickly, but again, this bishop h6 being the automatic conditioned reflex would be to just go rook e8. But again, given the fact that I was able to recognize, oh, black's dark squares are very weak, as in kind of like the Karpov game, I was able to take this pawn on g3 and go for this sort of exchange sacrifice, which actually turned out to be much stronger than just going rook e8, which, you know, the position evaluation here is like -1 and this one is like -3, so quite a big difference. Ended the game much quicker. But okay, this is going to be one of the last two exercises for the video, so lock in for this one. We have a position again that I had earlier this year in a real classical game, and just so I'll give a little bit of context as well for this one to kind of share what had happened leading up to this point. So pretty much I established this whole kingside formation. I was looking to play g5 with my rook on g1 and create some sort of really killer attack. My opponent though eventually played king f8, and at that point I realized like, oh, if I go g5, their idea is to go take, king e7, rook h8, and at that point I'm actually not sure it's me who's doing the attacking. It might actually be me who's getting attacked. So I was like, okay, crap, I don't know if this is going to work out. And, well, okay, at least maybe, though, like, we'll just, like, have the position be closed and maybe I can hold this. But then they played a5, and I was like, oh, okay, well, if I don't have anything on the king side, and they just slaughter me on the queen side, and open things up there, that I don't know, I'm just doing the math and I'm like, that doesn't sound very, very attractive. So I was having to really figure out in this position, how do I figure this position out? So anyways, have a think, see what you would play, and we'll discuss this. So, okay, this position basically though, in the end, what I decided on was to play this move, not like, I mean, you could play a move like knight e3, but then like a4, and black would still continue just making headway on the queen side, and like if you takes, it's just looking very unpleasant. You have all these weaknesses, and the engine might kind of be like, oh, whatever, I'll defend this, but as a human, it's not much fun. I should also note you never really want to take this. I'm just imagining this diagonal being opened up, and it does not look pretty. The e file as well, maybe bishop takes d4 should always be the last move we are considering to play. Maybe c takes is even good as well, but e takes just looks so strong, opening that bishop up. So the move I decided to play in the game though, which the engines don't actually really approve of, but I think from a practical point of view was quite a decent idea, was this move a4. And at first it looks a little bit crazy because, okay, we're stopping a4, I get that, but it's like we're hanging the whole pawn, right? And it's not just a pawn, but it's like, oh, maybe it's another pawn as well. So like this idea would seem a little bit ridiculous, and to be honest, even as I was going for it, I was a little bit unsure, but it turns out the only way to really punish it is within a very concrete line, which both my opponent and I kind of overlooked. So the critical move would of course be they take another pawn. The idea though is queen c2, you attack this and this, and if they just move back, then you pick up two minor pieces for the rook, and generally that seems quite good. We're going to play like knight e3, maybe the bishop to this diagonal as well. They have a lot of weak light squares, so it seems. And if they take on f1 and then try to go knight d4, then still this diagonal is quite weak. It seems like, okay, even though they have two pawns up, you look at a position like this, and a bishop's going to be coming there, maybe g5 as well. We have quite a bit going on for us. And well, if they go c4 immediately, at the very least it looks like rook c3, and that pawn is going to be kind of falling. So as long as we're able to like establish this blockade in time, like before they push, or if they push like it just falls, right, it seems like we should have a pretty decent compensation. So my opponent saw this in the game and they were like, oh, that looks like a little bit complicated. So she just played knight d4, and then after knight e3 defending the pawn. It was very difficult to break through. White can really hold together all the weaknesses, and black's extra pawn is the b pawn, right? But it's not so easy for them to actually utilize it, this extra pawn, because if they push it, we're defending the b5 square pretty well. In fact, it might even be better if the pawn just wasn't on the board at all, because at least then they could utilize the open b file. But yeah, unfortunately, not really much they could do about that. And so she tried to play rook a6. Well, she didn't play rook a6. I was thinking about this in the game. The engine isn't concerned about it though. What actually happened was, I don't know why rook a6 keeps getting played, but rook e8, and essentially the position just stayed locked up. We shuffled a few pieces and eventually agreed to a draw. The engines say this is about zeros if you run it for long enough. But yeah, after a4, you might be wondering then, well, why did you say like it wasn't so good? Like the lines you showed at least might not have seemed that bad. The reason was because after this, bishop takes c4, queen c2, bishop f7, this was actually the strongest move, which I wasn't expecting, because I thought like, oh, I have two pieces for the rook, and especially if I get like knight e3 and it's looking pretty good, bishop f1, and we control these knight squares pretty well. However, it's just one move too slow. They get c4 and queen g3, bishop c5, rook d3, and it's not looking good. I mean, first of all, they're attacking this, but now we defend that rook d3, rook e1 might defend that for the moment, but like they have stuff like c3, and just in general, like this pawn's going to be super dangerous. The other rook's going to be coming in, queen b6 maybe as well. Yeah, it wouldn't have been good if they landed on this, but luckily both of us, our calculations were a little bit superficial in this position, not fully going out of our way to really see what was going on at the end of that variation. So a bit of a lesson in there, I guess, as well. But the main thing that I wanted to show was not the just concrete calculations that were done, but the idea to even give this pawn up to begin with, to sort of create this scenario where now they can no longer, because we occupied the space on the queen side, it's a lot more difficult for them to push forward and really execute their plans. And by creating this blockade, we're able to create this sort of scenario of a positional draw. Again, this is probably the most tricky position out of anything we've talked about today. So yeah, if you consider a4 good, if you saw a4 was bad because of this whole line and c4, bishop c5, rook d3, you probably shouldn't be watching my videos. But to wrap up the video, I want this to be a bit of a cautionary tale actually, compared to the rest of the video where I'm like, sacrifice material is amazing, do it every game. It's not actually what I'm saying, but some people might misconstrue it to be like that. So yeah, anyways, this was a game that I played back in 2018. I was around 2000 FIDE at the time. My opponent was a FIDE master actually. And he played this move knight d4. And anyways, we're going to go further into the story, but just take a think in this position and figure out what would you do after knight d4. So anyways, this was actually a move that I was kind of expecting from my opponent. I'd already at this point in my chess career or whatever developed like some level of appreciation for non-materialistic ideas. And so this idea of knight d4, I actually remember my opponent playing, or at least I'd seen it before in the King's Indian, where if you take like twice on d4, the idea is that now black has given up their dark squared bishop, and in the rising positions, you're probably hoping that these dark squares are going to be quite weak. And let's go a little bit further. Let's give a very optimistic variation that would probably never happen, where black gets a queen in this diagonal as well, and now like white's king looks like it's going to be mated in the next 5 moves. So probably like this position is not like something that white should really be going for at all, but it is the dream scenario when black sacrifices his pawn on d4, or like they play this knight d4 move that offers up a pawn sacrifice that like, okay, white's giving up the dark squared bishop. If they take again as well, then this whole diagonal opens up and goes from something before where the pawn on e5 blocks it to like now it's just like busted open and you have all these open lines. So I knew after knight d4, I was like, oh, I have to be a little bit careful of that. However, then I did a complete like 180 and I was like, oh, what if I sacrifice my exchange and now like my bishop is using this diagonal and like I'm going to be the one attacking. And long story short, it didn't go well. Like knight takes d5, takes bishop f6, they first of all countered the bishop. And I was like, oh, queen d2, maybe I keep the tension that they take queen c7. I was like, oh, okay, well, my queen is not really that close to the king. Maybe I'll try like prepare it a few moves. So I did that. They played rook a8. I played knight e2. They took a pawn. I'm like, okay, I have rook g1. Maybe I'm kind of attacking. Then my opponent played bishop b5, and I was like, oh, well, this doesn't look good because if I take it, queen c2, king a1, and if you can visualize the position correctly, rook takes a3 is indeed checkmate in that position. So I was like, oh crap, and if rook takes g6, this does absolutely nothing. So I actually just resigned in this position. There was nothing white could do. And so yeah, the lesson I learned from this game is that yeah, you sometimes have to control yourself a little bit when it comes to sacrificing material. There has to be some sort of ground for you doing it in this position. There was no reason for me to really sack my rook for the knight. I didn't really gain that much out of it. Instead, it would have just been better to go for the more simple takes. And not even rook takes d4 in this position, queen g3. Just counter-attacking this and this, and just playing for the initiative. And if they, at this point, defend the pawn, now rook takes d4 is even stronger because it actually attacks the d6 pawn. And it's just very difficult to defend. There's also moves like this coming in. So black is pretty much busted. Anyway, so if you're anywhere between 16 to 2200 rated online, I have a form down in the description below for coaching if you want more personal help with improving your game. But for the rest of you guys, I don't know, have a good one, and I'll talk to you quite soon.